Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News, South Florida Conservative News Center. It is Thursday, May 5th, 12:30 p.m., and we're going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and the importance of what we have lost in this case. So, for nearly 20 years, the name Jeffrey Epstein has surfaced again and again in the American news cycle. And every time it happens, the same pattern unfolds. You'll get a batch of documents that appear, a list of names circulates, cable news lights up, and social media erupts into a frenzy. Who knew Jeffrey Epstein? Who flew on the plane? Who appears in the contact book? But while the public is chasing a list of names, something much more important has been quietly pushed aside: the real story of the Jeffrey Epstein case. And today, that distraction is happening again. Congress is now demanding answers from Attorney General Pam Bondi about the so-called Epstein files. The political world is treating this as though the current Justice Department somehow has created a controversy. But the narrative ignores a simple reality, which is this: partisan or not, Pam Bondi didn't build the Epstein case. She inherited it. And if Americans actually wanted to understand what happened here, we need to stop chasing political talking points and start examining the moments when the investigation itself changed course. Because the Epstein case didn't collapse once, it collapsed 3 separate times. So let's go back to the beginning. The Epstein investigation didn't start in Washington. It started right up the road here in Palm Beach. In 2005, local police began investigating reports that Epstein was recruiting underage girls to his Florida mansion. Detectives started interviewing victims, and what they found was disturbing. Multiple girls described the same system: a pipeline where teenagers were recruited, paid, and sometimes encouraged to recruit other girls. The Palm Beach investigators built what they believed was a serious criminal case. They get testimony, financial records, witness statements. By the time the investigation was complete, local police were recommending multiple felony charges. But then the case moved into federal hands, and suddenly the trajectory changed. So instead of sweeping federal trafficking prosecution, Epstein entered into a plea agreement in 2008, a deal that reduced the case to state charges, a deal that allowed him to serve roughly 13 months in a county facility. And even that sentence came with extraordinary privileges. And those of you who know people who've been in jail, you'll think it is extraordinary. You have a potential federal trafficking case became a narrow local prosecution. And that was the moment, for the first time, when the Epstein case shrank. Okay? More than a decade later, the story explodes back into the headlines. In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again, this time on federal sex trafficking charges in New York. Federal agents raided his Manhattan residence. They reportedly seized computers, hard drives, photographs, digital storage devices. For the first time in years, prosecutors had both the evidence and the defendant, and that meant something incredibly important could finally happen. They could have a trial. A public trial would have forced testimony. Witnesses would have taken the stand. Evidence would have been introduced in open court, let alone what we would have found in discovery. Whatever secrets were buried inside the Epstein case might finally have come to light. And that moment never arrived, because in August of 2019, Jeffrey Epstein died in federal custody before the trial began. So before all the suit was able to empty out, he's dead. The central defendant in the case was gone, and with him went the courtroom confrontation that might have exposed the full scope of the operation. So 2 years later, prosecutors pursued charges against Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. Her trial in 2021 resulted in a conviction. She was sentenced to prison for helping recruit underage girls for Epstein, and that outcome mattered because it delivered accountability. But the scope of the case was remarkably narrow. The prosecution focused largely on Maxwell's actions and a limited number of victims. What many observers expected, which was a broad investigation into the wider network surrounding Epstein, which would have made sense, never materialized. Instead, the case closed around Maxwell. Three major moments, three opportunities for the investigation to expand. Three times the scope became smaller. Now, fast forward to today. The political world is obsessing over Epstein again. But what is the conversation actually about? They want names, they want flight logs, they want contact lists, they want social connections. Have you heard this story before? And here's the truth that almost never gets said out loud. Being listed in Epstein's address book does not prove a crime. If he had a book that says, people I have sold young girls to, and then an amount, that would be incriminating. Just to have people in a contact list, go to LinkedIn. That would be getting his LinkedIn, right? It's that unimportant to have that list, okay? It proves only that somebody had some form of contact with him. The real investigation question lies somewhere else entirely, and that is in the evidence. When federal investigators seize digital media, the computers, the drives, the storage devices, they create a forensic catalog, a map of the entire archive. I'm sure you saw that thing that was done with the Hunter Biden laptop. Just figure a much larger, more detailed version. That catalog will identify various files, it tracks the metadata, and it helps investigators determine who appears in the material. In the Epstein case, investigators reportedly seized enormous quantities of digital evidence in 2019, but the public record tells us remarkably little about the scope of that archive, how many files were recovered, how many victims were identified, how many perpetrators, which is more important and goes back to the stupid thing Pam Bondi said that started all this, how many perpetrators were identified in the videos? Were additional prosecutions considered? Those answers would tell us far more about the case than any celebrity name in a flight log ever could. But those are the questions almost nobody in the political debate seems interested in asking. Instead, what we have today is a political spectrum. Political spectacle, which is anyway. Every faction in Washington wants the Epstein story to damage their opponents. So they search documents for names. They're looking for a political weapon. And in the process, the actual structure of the case, the legal decisions, the investigative turning points, they disappear from the conversation. Nobody's worried about the crime. Nobody's worried about the victims. All they're looking for is if there's a senator or a congressman or a president that they can drag across the coals and push their political agendas through. The true victims of Jeffrey Epstein are victimized again and again and again. And that is how this thing plays out. So Pam Bondi may be the current custodian of the Epstein files, but she did not create the evidence archive. The decisions that shaped this case happened years earlier. Multiple administrations, multiple prosecutors, almost 2 decades, 20 years. If Congress truly wants answers, the investigation cannot stop with the current attorney general. I suggest they go back and get the last attorney general and the 2 or 3 before him or her, and they all have to be brought in and treated the same way. Kicking Pam Bondi around on this is ridiculous. There are other things you could kick her around on. This is not one of them. So it would have to look, like I said, to look back, especially at the decisions that narrowed the case in 2010, especially at the lost trial in 2019, especially at what limited the scope of the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution, and especially what happened to that inventory that I was telling you about. Where is that? Where is the total inventory of all of the information and the descriptions of what was on all this electronic data, right? So until those moments are actually examined honestly, the public debate's just going to be chasing lists of names while the real history of the case remains buried, okay? So as they say, the Epstein files aren't lost. The Epstein case definitely is. And that may be the most important unanswered question of all. That's pretty much what you should be looking at. So if you liked or subscribe, if you like this or things like this, if you have more questions about this particular case or any of the other content that we have covered, please let us know. If you have a question about anything that's going on right now in the world and we can help you with it, we will try to arrange to have a video or a written copy of something. It'll be done within a week or two if we can get it done. All right. So that's all we have for today, Thursday. Have a good day and be safe out there.